The screams of sirens pierced the night as I watched helplessly from the ridge. Below me, the fire department stood frozen beside their trucks, hoses limp in their hands like dead snakes. No water. The flames devoured the Peterson house, orange fingers clawing higher into the darkness. I could see the confusion on their faces. Why were the hydrants dry? My ankle throbbed, still bleeding from my desperate climb over my own fence. The thick chain dangled from my gate, that ridiculous padlock still intact, mocking me. Through the smoke, I could make out Karen watching from her immaculate lawn, arms crossed, oblivious to the chaos she had caused. My phone buzzed with another emergency alert. The fire was spreading to the next house. 3,000 people depending on water that could not flow because one woman decided my gate offended her precious neighborhood aesthetics. I clutched the bolt cutters in my hand, knowing what I had to do. In that moment, looking at the destruction below, I realized a terrible truth. Sometimes the biggest disasters are not caused by storms or lightning, but by people who think rules matter more than lives. The morning started peacefully enough. The sun had just begun to stretch its golden fingers across the mountains when I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, ready for my routine check of the water relay station. That was my responsibility, just as it had been my father's before me. I worked maintenance for the rural water facility that operated silently beneath my property, invisible to most but vital to all. I nearly dropped my mug when I saw it. My front gate, the one that led to both my driveway and the crucial access road behind my house, was sealed shut. A heavy chain snaked through the iron bars, secured with a padlock I had never seen before. I set down my coffee and approached slowly, as if the chain might be a hallucination that would vanish upon closer inspection. It did not. The metal links were cold and very real under my fingers. I rattled the gate in frustration, the chain clinking mockingly against the bars. That was when I noticed her. Karen Winters stood on her pristine porch directly across the street, watching me, not with concern or confusion, but with satisfaction. When our eyes met, she raised her hand in a smug little wave. I called out to her, "Did you see who did this?" Though I already suspected the answer. Karen had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago and immediately appointed herself unofficial enforcer of rules no one else seemed to care about. "I took care of the problem," she announced, walking toward her perfectly trimmed hedge line. "The Homeowners Association has regulations about leaving gates open for industrial vehicles. It ruins the aesthetic appeal of our community." I gripped the bars tighter. "This is my property. You have no right to lock my gate." "Actually, I have every right as head of the beautification committee." She smoothed her crisp blouse. "Your constant truck traffic violates Section 7 of our covenant. The gate stays locked until you comply with proper residential standards." "You do not understand," I began, trying to explain about the water system, about the critical infrastructure hidden behind my property. "Those trucks are from the city water department. They need—" "I am not interested in your excuses," she interrupted, her voice slicing through my explanation. "The community has standards. If you want special exceptions, take it up at the next meeting." Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked back to her house, every step radiating self-righteousness. I stood there, stunned, as the first rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, moving faster than the weather report had predicted. I checked my watch and felt my stomach tighten. Today was scheduled for the quarterly emergency system test. The city engineers would arrive within hours, expecting clear access to the underground pump vault that regulated water pressure for the entire township. I pulled out my phone to call the city office, but paused as a gust of wind brought the scent of rain. The approaching storm made everything more urgent. During severe weather, the main water system often struggled, and the backup relay beneath my land became crucial. If power went out, which it often did during mountain storms, the emergency reserve would need manual monitoring. I walked the perimeter of my property, looking for another way to access the back road. But Karen had been thorough. The fence line was intact all around, with no gaps large enough even to squeeze through. The only entrance was the chained gate. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, I felt something beyond anger growing inside me, genuine fear. This was not just an inconvenience or a petty neighborhood dispute. Without access to that vault, if anything went wrong with the main water system during the storm, there would be no way to activate the emergency protocols. No water pressure for fire hydrants. No reserve supply for hospitals. Nothing. I looked back at Corinne's house, where she had disappeared inside, likely feeling proud of her enforcement of meaningless rules. She had no idea what she had done. No idea that her little power play had just cut off emergency water access for over 3,000 people. As lightning split the sky, I knew this day would end badly for someone. I just did not know yet who would pay the highest price. Most people in town had no idea what lay beneath the patch of land behind my house. To them, it was just unused acreage, a small stretch of gravel road leading to nowhere important. But 20 feet below that unremarkable ground sat a concrete and steel chamber that had saved this township more times than anyone could count. My connection to the vault began with my grandfather. In 1962, when the town was expanding its water system, engineers identified this spot as the perfect location for a pressure regulator station. The elevation, the natural geology, the connection points to the main lines. Everything made this specific plot of land essential to their plans. Rather than forcing my grandfather out through eminent domain, the city offered a deal. The Roberts family would retain ownership of the surface property, but grant perpetual easement rights for the underground infrastructure and maintain a clear access road. In exchange, our family would receive a modest annual stipend, and one member would always be employed by the water department to oversee the facility. My father took on that role when my grandfather passed, teaching me everything about the system as I grew up. I remember him taking me down to the vault for the first time when I was 12. "This is not just pipes and gauges," he had told me, his voice echoing in the concrete chamber. "This is the lifeblood of the community. When everything else fails, these valves keep water flowing." When cancer took him 3 years ago, I inherited both the house and the responsibility. I never considered it a burden. There was something satisfying about maintaining a system most people never thought about but depended on every day. The community had changed around us, of course. What was once rural farmland gradually transformed into a suburban development with picket fences and property values. 2 years ago, the area was incorporated into the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association, though my property was grandfathered in with special exemptions due to the utility agreement. Corinne Winters arrived 6 months ago, moving into the redeveloped farmhouse across the street. She came from some planned community in California, bringing with her rigid ideas about what neighborhoods should look like. Within a week, she had joined the HOA board. Within a month, she was heading the beautification committee, and within 3 months, she had written me up for 17 different violations. The trash bins left out past 6 p.m. The work truck parked in my driveway overnight. The lack of seasonal decorations during community festivals, each complaint more trivial than the last. Then came the HOA meeting last month where Corinne proposed new restrictions on industrial activity in residential zones. She displayed photos of city water trucks using my access road, claiming they created unsightly traffic and depressed community aesthetics. I stood up in that meeting explaining plainly what those trucks were for. "That road leads to critical infrastructure," I had said, keeping my voice steady despite my rising frustration. "The city has legal rights to that access point. It is not up for debate." The HOA president, an older gentleman who actually understood the situation, tried to explain to Corinne that my property had special considerations. But she would not hear it. "Rules are rules," she had insisted. "No one gets special treatment. If we make one exception, soon everyone will want exceptions." After the meeting, she cornered me in the parking lot. "I did some research on your so-called agreement," she said, making air quotes with her manicured fingers. "The original contract was signed 60 years ago. Times change. Neighborhoods evolve. You cannot keep operating like this is still farmland." I had tried reasoning with her one last time. "Corinne, that water system serves the entire community, including your house. It needs regular maintenance and emergency access." "Find another route that does not go through our neighborhood," she had replied dismissively. "This is a residential area now, not an industrial zone." When I explained that relocating the access point would cost millions and require tearing up half the neighborhood, she simply shrugged. Not my problem. The HOA regulations are clear. I should have taken her threats more seriously. I should have anticipated she would take matters into her own hands when the HOA legal team advised against forcing changes to my property. But I never imagined she would be brazen enough to physically block access to critical infrastructure. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, I realized Karen had done exactly what my father had warned me about years ago. The biggest threat to the system, he had said, is not mechanical failure. It is people who do not understand what they are interfering with. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity. What the Weather Service had predicted as a moderate thunderstorm transformed into something more dangerous as it collided with the mountain air. Lightning fractured the sky in blinding patterns, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. I was on my porch, still trying to reach the city emergency line, when darkness fell across the entire valley. In the sudden silence that follows power loss, I could hear emergency generators kicking in at some of the larger properties. But I knew what was happening beneath the surface. Without electricity, the main water pumping station would be switching to backup power. If that failed, which it often did during severe storms, control would automatically transfer to the manual override system in my vault. A system I could not reach because of a locked gate. I tried the emergency dispatch one more time. This time, a harried voice answered. "Emergency services, please state your emergency." "This is Michael Roberts at the Northeast Relay Station," I said, raising my voice over the pounding rain. "I cannot access the manual override vault. The gate has been locked with a private chain and padlock." There was a pause. "Can you repeat that? Did you say the relay access is blocked?" "Affirmative, locked gate. I cannot reach the vault." The dispatcher's professional tone cracked slightly. "Sir, we are getting reports of power outages at the main pumping facility. The backup generators are not engaging properly. Control should be transferring to your relay station right now." "I understand, but I physically cannot reach the controls." The weight of the situation pressed down on me like the storm itself. "Hold one moment." I could hear urgent voices in the background. When the dispatcher returned, the tension in her voice was unmistakable. "Sir, we have multiple departments redirecting to your location, but response times are delayed due to flooding on Ridge Road. Can you find any way to access the vault?" I looked at the fence surrounding my property. It was 6 feet high, designed to keep trespassers away from the utility access. "I am going to try to climb over." Without waiting for a response, I ended the call and ran to the section of fence nearest the access road. The metal was slick with rain, but I managed to pull myself up. As I swung my leg over the top, my foot slipped on the wet surface. I came down hard, my ankle twisting beneath me with a sickening pop. White-hot pain shot up my leg. I lay in the mud, rain pelting my face, fighting through waves of nausea. After several attempts, I managed to stand, putting minimal weight on my injured ankle. But I had cleared the fence. I was inside my own property, limping toward the access road. My phone rang again. It was the fire department chief. "Roberts, we have got a serious situation developing. Water pressure is dropping across the entire grid. Hydrants in the Western District are already running dry." "I am trying to reach the vault now," I gasped, each step sending daggers of pain through my leg. "How long I looked down the muddy path that led to the underground facility. Under normal circumstances, it was a 3-minute walk. With my injured ankle and the storm, 10 minutes, maybe more. He swore under his breath. "We have lightning strikes on the western ridge. If fires start, we have got no water pressure to fight them." As I limped toward the vault, movement caught my eye. Through the curtain of rain, I could make out Karen standing on her covered porch, watching the commotion. She held a steaming mug in her hands, observing my struggle with detached curiosity. From her expression, she clearly thought this was some petty dispute about neighborhood rules, that I was overreacting to her enforcement of HOA regulations. She had no idea that fire hydrants were failing across town, that emergency services were scrambling, That because of her chain and padlock, an entire community's safety infrastructure was paralyzed during a crisis. The irony was bitter. Karen had moved here seeking a perfectly controlled environment, a community where everything followed her rigid rules of order. Yet her actions had now unleashed precisely the kind of chaos and danger she had tried so hard to prevent. As I struggled down the path, each step agony, I could hear emergency sirens beginning to wail in the distance. The call came as I was halfway down the access road, my injured ankle throbbing with each labored step. Chief Mercer's voice crackled through my phone, almost drowned out by the storm. "Roberts, we have got a structure fire on Westland Drive. Lightning strike to a detached garage, spreading fast." My blood ran cold. Westland Drive was a densely packed residential area, houses built close together, if a fire took hold there. "Status on the hydrants?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Bone dry. We have got tanker trucks mobilizing, but with these road conditions." He did not need to finish. Heavy rescue equipment would be painfully slow on flooding mountain roads. I made a decision. I am going back for tools. The gate has to come down now. Turning around was excruciating, but I forced myself back toward my house, moving as quickly as my damaged ankle would allow. In the tool shed beside my garage, I found what I needed: heavy-duty bolt cutters, normally used for clearing fallen branches from the fence line. Before returning to the gate, I did something crucial. I pulled out my phone and recorded a quick video documenting the chain, the unauthorized padlock, and my clear statement about the emergency situation. Legal protection just in case. By the time I reached the front gate again, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion and the increasingly loud emergency sirens. Karen stood among them, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded as I positioned the bolt cutters around the chain. I addressed the crowd rather than her. "This gate provides access to critical water infrastructure. Blocking it has cut off emergency water pressure to the entire township. There is an active fire on Westland Drive with no hydrant pressure to fight it." Before Karen could object, I squeezed the handles of the bolt cutters. The chain snapped with a satisfying crack. "That is vandalism," Karen shrieked, stepping forward. "That is HOA property. I will have you arrested." I ignored her completely, swinging the gate open. As I did, an emergency vehicle rounded the corner, lights flashing. Two city water officials jumped out, faces grim. "Roberts, thank God. System status." "Unknown, heading to the vault now." I tossed them the bolt cutters and began limping down the access road. "Lock has been removed." Karen was not finished. She blocked the path of the officials, her voice reaching a new pitch of indignation. "You cannot just ignore HOA regulations. This man has been violating community standards for months. I had every right to secure that gate." One of the officials, a veteran supervisor named Ray who had worked with my father for decades, fixed her with a cold stare. "Ma'am, you have just obstructed emergency services during a natural disaster. I suggest you step aside before we add more charges." I did not stay to watch the confrontation. Every second counted now. My ankles screamed in protest as I forced myself down the gravel path, through the trees, to the innocuous concrete structure set into the hillside. The vault entrance, a heavy steel door with multiple warning signs, was mercifully still accessible. Inside, I flipped on my emergency flashlight and descended the metal staircase into the cool darkness below. The control room was silent. No pumps running, no pressure regulators hissing. Exactly as I had feared. The automated systems had attempted to transfer control here when the main station failed, but without manual activation, the entire grid remained dormant. I moved quickly through the startup sequence, procedures I had practiced monthly for years. Override switches engaged. Manual pressure regulators adjusted. Backup pumps initialized. The system groaned to life around me, water beginning to flow through the massive pipes. I grabbed the emergency radio from its wall mount. "Control, this is Roberts at Northeast Relay. System is active. Water pressure should be restoring across the grid." There was a moment of static then, confirming pressure increase in sectors 1 through 4, western hydrants coming back online. Relief flooded through me as powerful as the water now surging through the pipes. I sank onto the operator's chair, finally acknowledging the throbbing pain in my ankle. The radio crackled again. Roberts, fire crews report hydrants operational. They have contained the Westland Drive fire. 2 structures with significant damage, but no spread beyond that. 2 homes damaged. It could have been much worse, could have been dozens without water pressure to fight the flames. All because of one woman's obsession with rules and control. As I sat in the humming vault, I knew this was far from over. The chain was broken, but the real battle was just beginning. By morning, my little corner of the world had transformed into a media circus. News vans lined the street, reporters clutching microphones in the drizzling aftermath of the storm. The story had spread faster than the fire itself. Local man breaks chain to restore water pressure during emergency. I stood in my muddy yard, ankle wrapped in an elastic bandage, recounting the events to a reporter from Channel 5. Behind her, camera crews captured footage of the gate, the gravel access road, the path to the underground vault. The system worked exactly as designed once we could access it, I explained, keeping my voice level and factual. The problem was not technical, it was access. The emergency route to the control vault had been physically blocked with a chain and padlock that should never have been there. And you had no way to remove this obstruction when the emergency began, the reporter asked. I had to return to my property for tools after injuring myself attempting to climb over my own fence. I gestured to my wrapped ankle. By then, fires had already started in the Western District. The camera swung toward Corinne's house, where she stood on her immaculate lawn speaking to another reporter. Even from a distance, I could see she had dressed carefully for her moment in the spotlight. Crisp blouse, perfectly styled hair, practiced smile. Simply enforcing the aesthetic standards our community expects, her voice drifted across the yard. The industrial traffic through a residential area was a clear violation of HOA bylaws. I had no way of knowing it would affect emergency services. The reporter interviewing me raised an eyebrow. Your neighbor claims she was unaware of the critical nature of the access road. There are 3 signs posted on the gate and access road identifying it as utility access, I pointed out. The easement and its purpose are documented in all property records for this subdivision, and I personally explained the situation to her multiple times, including at last month's HOA meeting. By midday, the official responses began. The fire department chief held a brief press conference at the scene of the damaged homes on Westland Drive, publicly acknowledging my actions. If Mr. Roberts had not regained access to the control vault when he did, we would be looking at a much more devastating situation today, he stated firmly. Water pressure was restored just in time to prevent the fire from jumping to neighboring structures. The HOA was less direct. Their statement, emailed to all residents, carefully avoided taking responsibility while simultaneously distancing themselves from Corinne's actions. While the association maintains authority over community aesthetic standards, the board wishes to clarify that it did not authorize any physical restriction of the utility access route on Roberts' property. We are cooperating fully with city officials to prevent such misunderstandings in the future. Misunderstandings, as if chaining shut an emergency access point was somehow a simple miscommunication. By late afternoon, city officials arrived, not just water department staff, but representatives from the mayor's office and emergency services. They inspected the vault, reviewed the access path, and confirmed what I had been saying all along. The facility was not only legal but essential. This infrastructure is covered under Municipal Code Section 342 regarding critical emergency services, the city attorney explained as we stood beside the open gate. Interfering with access is classified as a Class B misdemeanor at minimum. Given the actual impact on emergency response, there could be additional charges. I watched as an official approached Corinne's door with paperwork in hand. a formal citation for obstruction of emergency services. From my porch, I could see her face transform from confident indignation to shocked disbelief as she read the document. The neighborhood dynamics shifted almost immediately. Neighbors who had previously nodded along with Karen's complaints about my property now stopped by with awkward apologies and casseroles. Several admitted they had never understood what the water station actually did until they saw it on the news. "We had no idea," my next-door neighbor confessed, avoiding my eyes. "Karen made it sound like you were just being difficult about rules everyone else follows." I accepted their gestures with grace, not out of a need for vindication, but because rebuilding community trust mattered more than grudges. Still, as I watched Karen's previously loyal supporters scatter like leaves in the wind, I knew something fundamental had changed. This was no longer about a locked gate. It was about accountability. And I was not about to let this incident fade into community memory as just another neighborhood dispute. 3 weeks after the storm, I sat in a wood-paneled courtroom beside my attorney, Angela Rivera. Across the aisle, Karen perched stiffly beside her lawyer, a slick corporate type from a firm in the city. The room was packed, not just with official parties, but with neighbors, HOA board members, and local reporters. This had become more than a simple liability case. For our small community, it was a reckoning. My lawsuit was straightforward: property interference, endangerment, and compensatory damages for my injury. Angela had advised a measured approach, focusing on documentable facts rather than emotional appeals. The evidence spoke for itself: photos of the chain and lock, video of me explaining the emergency before cutting it, dispatch call logs, timestamps of when water pressure dropped and returned, and the fire department's official incident report. "Your Honor," Angela began, her voice calm and authoritative, "this case demonstrates a clear pattern of willful interference with critical infrastructure. Ms. Winters did not simply make a mistake. She deliberately blocked access to an emergency water control facility despite multiple warnings about its function." Karen's attorney attempted to spin a different narrative. "My client was simply enforcing community standards that all residents agreed to when purchasing property in Pinecrest Estates. She had no reason to believe her actions would have any impact on city services." The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and 20 years on the bench, seemed unimpressed by this argument. "Counsel, are you suggesting your client was unaware of the multiple warning signs posted on the property, or the documented easement in the property records?" "Your Honor, Ms. Winters believed those were outdated designations from before the area was rezoned residential." I watched Karen as her lawyer spoke. She sat with perfect posture, occasionally nodding along, trying to project an image of reasonable misunderstanding. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tight line of her mouth. She knew she was in trouble. When it was her turn to testify, Karen attempted to play the role of concerned citizen. "I was only trying to protect our property values," she insisted, voice trembling with practiced sincerity. "Mr. Roberts consistently violated HOA regulations that everyone else follows. The industrial traffic through our residential streets was a safety hazard for children." The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Winters, did you contact the city water department before blocking access to their facility?" No, Your Honor. I addressed my concerns through proper HOA channels." "And when the HOA legal counsel advised against forcing changes to the Roberts property due to the utility easement, what did you do?" Karen hesitated. "I took initiative to enforce the rules myself." "Initiative," the judge repeated, the word hanging in the air. "You took initiative to obstruct access to emergency infrastructure serving 3,000 people." The HOA representatives squirmed uncomfortably in their seats. Their insurance company had already distanced itself from Karen's actions, refusing coverage on grounds that she had acted individually without board authorization. Now they faced their own secondary lawsuit from the city for failing to properly educate board members about utility easements within the subdivision. The city's separate complaint was equally damning. The municipal attorney presented a detailed analysis of the additional costs incurred during the emergency response: extra personnel, water tanker deployment, extended overtime hours, and property damage that could have been prevented with prompt water pressure. The city estimates excess costs at approximately $67,000 directly attributable to delayed access to the control vault, he stated, not including property damage to private residences. Throughout the proceedings, I noticed something remarkable happening in the gallery. Corinne's social circle, the same people who had once backed her complaints against me, now sat far away from her. Some even nodded along with testimony against her. The community had chosen its side. The judge's ruling came after just 2 days of testimony. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Winters acted with reckless disregard for public safety and willfully interfered with critical infrastructure. The judgment included compensatory damages for my injury, punitive damages for the willful nature of her actions, and full legal costs. Additionally, she was ordered to pay restitution to the city for emergency response complications. Most satisfying was the written apology Corinne was required to submit, not just to me, but to the municipal records, where it would remain permanently archived. As we left the courthouse, Angela touched my arm. "You know she will probably move after this." I nodded, watching Corinne hurry to her car, avoiding reporters' questions. This was never about driving her out. It was about establishing that rules exist for reasons, and sometimes the most important ones are not written in HOA bylaws. Justice had not come as a dramatic revelation or tearful confession. It had come through methodical documentation, calm testimony, and the slow grinding wheels of accountability. Spring arrived with deliberate gentleness, as if the land itself was apologizing for winter's fury. The last traces of storm damage had been repaired across town. The charred remains on Westland Drive had been cleared away, new construction already underway. And in our little corner of Pinecrest Estates, other changes were taking root. The HOA underwent a complete restructuring after the lawsuit. Corinne resigned immediately following the court decision, but the ripple effects continued. Several board members stepped down, claiming they had never fully understood the legal liabilities they had assumed. The insurance company mandated a complete review of all HOA policies and proper training for new board members. The new leadership approached their role with humility rather than authority. Their first official act was to formally recognize the utility easement on my property and establish protocols to ensure no future interference. The petty violation notices stopped arriving in my mailbox. The city made changes too. Work crews installed a new, more prominent sign at the entrance to the access road. "Critical infrastructure emergency water control do not block VIOLATORS will be PROSECUTD." No one could claim ignorance now. With part of the settlement money, I installed comprehensive security, cameras monitoring the gate and vault entrance, motion-activated lights along the access road, and alarm systems that would alert both me and the water department if anyone tampered with the entrance. The days of invisible infrastructure were over. Corinne's house went on the market 6 weeks after the trial. There was no farewell party, no moving truck parade with neighbors helping. Professional movers came on a Tuesday morning while most people were at work. By evening, the house stood empty, a FOR sale sign swaying gently in the front yard. She left as she had arrived, focused entirely on herself, oblivious to the community around her. The house sold quickly despite the circumstances. A young family with 2 small children, drawn by the good schools and safe streets. They introduced themselves to everyone on the block, eager to belong in a way Corinne never was. Slowly, my neighbors began stopping by again, not just to apologize, but to genuinely connect. Some brought housewarming gifts for the new family. Others offered to help with yard work while my ankle healed. The woman 3 doors down, a retired nurse, checked my bandages and brought homemade soup. "We should have stood up sooner," my neighbor Jim admitted one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. Corinne seemed so certain about everything, and most of us do not know much about HOA rules or utility easements. It was easier to go along. "Most systems work because people choose to make them work," I replied. "The water flows, the lights stay on, the roads get plowed, not just because of infrastructure, but because people respect what matters. 6 months after the storm, I received an unexpected visitor. Mayor Davidson himself came to inspect the vault facility, part of a new city initiative to document and protect critical infrastructure. "You know," he said as we walked the gravel path to the control building, "most people never think about what happens beneath their feet. They turn the tap, water comes out. They flush, it goes away. Simple. But it is people like you who make that simplicity possible." The mayor paused at the vault entrance. "The city council has approved a proposal to name this facility. From now on, this will be the Roberts Station, in honor of your family's 3 generations of service." A small ceremony followed weeks later, nothing elaborate, just a simple plaque installed beside the vault door, acknowledging what my grandfather, father, and I had protected. Several neighbors attended, along with water department staff and emergency responders. It felt like healing, not just for me, but for the community. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves tumbled across the yard in bright spirals, my 8-year-old niece Anna visited. She had heard the story from her parents, but wanted to see the famous gate for herself. I took her hand and walked her down the gravel path I had limped along that stormy night. "Is this where you saved everyone's water?" she asked, eyes wide with childish admiration. "This is where many people work together to solve a problem," I corrected gently, not wanting to oversimplify. She studied the new sign with solemn attention. "Will you have to save it again someday?" I smiled, thinking about the cameras now monitoring the gate, the new city protocols, the more engaged community. "I hope not, but if it needs protecting, someone will be here to do it." Anna considered this, her small hand still in mine. "Because that is what matters, right? Not the rules about what color your house can be or if your grass is too tall." "Exactly." I squeezed her hand, surprised by the wisdom from such a young person. "The most important rules are not always written down. Sometimes they are just understood." As we walked back toward the house, the gate stood open behind us, not just a passage for utility trucks, but a reminder that communities are built on more than bylaws and property lines. They are built on understanding what truly matters and having the courage to protect it when no one else will.